Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Wolf in the Fold, which is episode 7 of season 2 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek, the original series, one episode at a time. In this video I will cover the episode Wolf in the Fold. So Wolf in the Fold is the episode where while Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Scotty are enjoying a dance from a belly dancer, Scotty goes off with the dancer in question, and then she is shortly found murdered afterwards, and Scotty is the prime suspect. An investigation ensues in which another murder occurs from another female officer from the Enterprise is murdered, and Scotty again is the prime suspect. And so the people who run the planet, this very peaceful planet, do a seance or whatever. The leader of the planet's wife conducts this seance, the lights turn off, and she's murdered, and Scotty again is shown as the prime suspect. And so they take the investigation to the Enterprise, where the chief investigator insists that Scotty be arrested. However, Kirk comes up with the hypothesis that this is some monster who used to be, or alien creature that used to be Jack the Ripper, that's actually in fact committing these murders. And then we get more evidence that this is the case, and they find out that the investigator himself is in fact this creature who goes around planet to planet and was once centuries ago Jack the Ripper, and he goes around planet to planet feeding off of fear and killing women. He then puts himself into the computer of the Enterprise and tries to scare them to death, but McCoy gives everyone an adrenaline that makes them high and not afraid at all. And then Kirk is eventually able to defeat the alien, beam him out into space, and dispersing him everywhere, so he lives a miserable existence as tiny molecules floating through space. Okay, so I guess first thing, since I'm a lot in these reviews I've been talking about what I thought about this episode when I first watched it as a teenager. I'm quite ashamed to say that when I first saw this episode when I was a teenager, I really liked it. And of course, my opinion has changed very drastically since then. Mainly just seeing how ridiculous it is, and actually how I learned more about storytelling and how ridiculous this episode seems. So first of all, it is the trope of the murder mystery trope. It's the Star Trek trope that's done repeatedly here on forth, and this is probably one of the worst examples, even worse than court martial, of the main character getting accused of a crime they didn't commit, and then there being a trial to try to convince everyone that they didn't commit this crime. And then of course at the end we find out, of course, it wasn't the main character who committed this crime. But it's also the trope of the murder mystery trope, done very, similar to Cat's Paw, which did the Halloween trope, but very, tropishy, very, cliche, and a very cliche, bland, by the numbers, bare bones, from a child's perspective. That's what this seems like with the murder mystery trope as well. It's very, you hear a woman off screaming, and then you find someone standing over her body with a knife. Dun, dun, dun. Who done it? And, like Cat's Paw, this features a seance, whatever. They try to pass it off. Oh, this is an alien, culture that can have empathy and read thoughts or whatever. But the way she performs it's like a gypsy during a seance. And then it just turns into a silly cartoon at the end of the episode, where they make the connection that it's Jack the Ripper, who's this weird alien creature going around saying, "Die, die, die! Oh, you're gonna die!" And by that stage, it's like Spock's brain territory, in my opinion. That's just absolutely over the top nonsense. Now, many of issues do I have with this episode. So first of all, the Jack the Ripper thing. I think this is a really stupid idea. After doing just the minimal amount of research on Jack the Ripper, they say historians will say the most likely candidate for who Jack the Ripper was, who I believe only killed 4 women. That, and I don't mean that in any way to take away from the grotesqueness of the crime, but if we're talking about like in the 23rd century, they're going to look back at a historical figure who turns out to be a alien murdering monster. Why wasn't he any of the other like serial killers who killed like 78 people? Or shit, Again, not to diminish the death of 4 people is still a terrible thing, but unfortunately, in modern day, it's all too common, and there's much, much, much worse examples. But it's just, it's part of the history. But anyway, reading what historians said about the incident, they said the most likely candidate of who Jack the Ripper was a rich aristocrat who had lots of connections in the government, who was able to pay people off, which is why they never found who the murderer of the women were, because he was high connected in the society at the time, which was corrupt and skewed towards favoring the rich, because in England was overpopulated, and favored rich over the poor, and you could buy anonymity, especially if you were a lord or whatever, and they said that was the most common reason. So, seeing all these fiction examples that try to say that Jack the Ripper was an alien or demon or some bullshit like that, it just drives me off the wall. It's just, I just think it's dumb. So, yeah, this isn't the only example. There's also an episode of The Outer Limits, which I just watched a couple of years ago, that had, had David Warner, good old David Warner, who played the Cardassian and tortured Picard in Chain of Command. The dude who was in The Princess Bride and Robin Hood Men in Tights. Carrie Elwes, yeah. So the 2 good actors, and they were in this terrible episode of The Outer Limits that was like Jack the Ripper turned out to be this alien, and it took place during the time of Jack the Ripper, and he turned out to be this alien who was taking over people's bodies and could shapeshift or possess people. And then there was also Babylon 5 did a Jack the Ripper episode, although in that one Jack the Ripper wasn't an alien. It's just that aliens took Jack the Ripper from Earth after he killed the women and made him do this penance thing, and he became this investigator or whatever. It was so dumb. And then there was this movie called From Hell, with Johnny Depp, I believe, which was about like Jack the Ripper being some sort of monster. I don't know. I didn't actually watch the whole thing because it looked dumb. Which I believe was based off a comic book. But regardless, it did tons of this bullshit with Jack the Ripper being some special alien or demon or whatever, and I think it's dumb. It's just most likely a rich person who was able to buy his way out of facing any consequences for his crimes. The better analogy to Jack the Ripper would be American Psycho. But that movie with Christian Bale. But but anyway, so yeah, but that doesn't necessarily, that's not the worst thing about this episode. By far, it's not the worst thing. I mean, yeah, it takes away a lot of what little credibility this episode had, and adds an extra layer of ridiculousness to it. But as I said, the clichéness of how they portray the murders. It's a cliche murder mystery. It's a cliche, innocent person being accused of a crime he didn't commit, and then as I said, it turns into a silly romp at the end with this alien going around the ship, and taking control of the computers, going, die, 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 you all must die, and they all have to get really stoned to counteract it. Although I will say I did take some enjoyment out of that scene where they were all drunk and like, hey, Jim, oh no, you better be careful, you can hurt someone with that thing. I did find that funny. And that was intentional humor, to be fair, unlike the unintentional humor with the die, 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 which I also find quite funny, but in a different way because it's terrible. So I find the intentional humor as well as the unintentional humor funny. But anyway, let me jump into how misogynist this episode is. Can I do that? So, first of all, the episode begins with them watching his belly dance, and Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. I don't think Spock. Kirk and McCoy, obviously. They take Scotty to watch this because they feel like Scotty's at risk of hating all women and having a resentment towards women in general because he was recently in an engineering accident that hurt him pretty badly. It was an accident that was started by a woman, and so they think that he's going to have a resentment towards women because of this. All right, why would they think this? Do they think it's if they think that, oh, that's just a common thing. If a guy gets hurt in an accident caused by women, they're obviously going to have a resentment towards women for now on. Then they are sexist and misogynist. Or the other option is Scotty implied that he would, and so he is sexist and misogynist. Like, what if the person who started the accident was black? Would he resent all black people? What if the person who started the accident was like this old dude? Would he resent all old people? What if the person who started the accident was Spock? Would he resent all Vulcans? Like, do you see where I'm going with this? Like, just because you're hurt in an accident that's caused by a certain person, that automatically turns you into a bigot? Like, what the fuck kind of logic is this, and why is it in this episode? Like, okay, and then God, I should have taken notes on all the misogynistic moments in this episode because there were quite a few. Oh yeah, there was the moment where Spock said, when he was talking about Jack the Ripper and how this alien creature was killing women in particular, it's like, oh, the female of the species is always more prone to terror and is made afraid or expresses fear more easily than the male counterparts. Says fucking who? Like, what? Hey, Mr. Spock, maybe you shouldn't stereotype and cliche. Maybe, and especially, he says of the species, doesn't even imply just human beings. So there's no alien race where women are actually tougher. It doesn't have to do with cultural mindset. It's I'm not even going to address that anymore. And then there's the whole aspect of this woman going off with Scotty when she was engaged to be married to this other dude. Now, to be fair about this, and it's, well, why I'm bringing it up now is because she's kind of like, it has a sense of like she's in this sex worker at a tourist planet that was meant for men to go and stare at her, and that's how she makes her money. So, and that's how she needs to do to survive. So there's some all other implications there, but let's throw that aside there for a moment. So the thing about I know why it's in the episode, why she was engaged to be married to this other dude and they were having fights. It's to cause a murder mystery. That's what murder mysteries do. They present different suspects and give them motive and being, well, maybe it wasn't Scotty, maybe it was this guy right there, or maybe it was this other guy who happens to be her father and never spoke up. Maybe it's them, and then it turns out, of course, to be none of them, which is what any murder mystery will do. It's that other guy in the corner who you would never suspect. Very cliche by the numbers murder mystery BS. Yeah, and I'm trying. Oh yeah, and the fact that I don't know, just the fact that they just keep killing random women, and in this episode, I don't know. And I know they try they do it because they're trying to make the analogy to Jack the Ripper, but it's just, I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me. And the other thing is, when Kirk is tells the computer to read off all of the incidents of where a bunch of women were killed and the killer was never found, and the computer lists 2 incidents on Earth and it leaves on Mars and it does another planet, and they're like, oh, it does. It's a pattern. It's leading straight to Rigel. I don't buy that. Unfortunately, and the sad truth is, the computer would be blabbering on for several days of recounting how many events there were where multiple women were murdered and the murder was never found. On Earth alone, let alone if you think of this universe where it has access to the libraries of all these alien cultures throughout the galaxy, I bet you a shit ton of them would have them, unfortunately, and it wouldn't just lead in the straight line. That is contrived bullshit. And let me talk about how Kirk does some really fucking huge leaps in logics to lead to the fact that Jack the Ripper is this alien monster who's responsible for this. And at one point, Kirk even says, "Whoa, we know it was Jack the Ripper." I'm like, how the fuck? You don't know that. This is just a wild speculation based off of very thin evidence. In fact, when the guy who turns out to be Jack the Ripper, the investigator dude is objecting and being like, well, this is ridiculous, it's just off the cuff, speculation. He's right. I side with him, but of course the episode doesn't want us to, and of course the episode would say I'm dumb for siding with him because it turns out he is in fact Jack the Ripper, but the episode's badly written and contrived. If it wasn't, then this dude would be totally right. Kirk is doing, and Spock for that matter, who's supposed to be the logical one, they're making some humongous leaps in logics and based off of very frivolous information. It kind of reminds me of these comedy shows where people will take this random information and try to connect the dots and they have nothing to do with each other and be like, aha! I was thinking of BoJack Horseman when the character of Todd would do that a lot. It's like, apes, and what do apes do? What do they have? Fingers and fingers. And he makes these leaps of logic that absolutely make no sense whatsoever, and that's exactly what Kirk and Spock are doing in this fucking scene. Their train of logic in this scene is completely nonsense. They're making giant leaps in logic where if this episode had any sense of realism to it whatsoever, they would be completely wrong. But of course, it doesn't, because this episode is trying to make us believe in this far-fetched, ridiculous fucking premise that Jack the Ripper was this alien creature that feeds off of women, and now he's currently on this planet killing women and framing Scotty. And even if I throw out the Jack the Ripper thing, let me pretend that doesn't exist. And if this episode didn't reference him at all and just made it an alien that was killing women, it would still be dumb. And especially the way that it's executed in this episode. When he, infests the computer and starts taunting him, "Oh, you're gonna die!" is some of the most ridiculous, poorly written nonsense. Now, I will say, as I said before, though, I do like them all getting stoned. It's always fun to see that. So that was the one sort of delight that I had with this episode. But other than that, this episode is just terrible. So now it's time, part of the video, where I thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting the channel. It's very much appreciated. We have Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Brian A., Alessandro Migalacio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal House. Thank you all so much for your support of the channel. Really, really helps me to continue and put out this content. So humbled that you appreciate what I do. So now let me get to, of course, reading some Patreon comments for this episode. For this one, we only have one comment, but it is a long one, from Brandon Neal Howes, who says, "Wolf in the Fold," from Robert Block, the man who gave us What Are Little Girls Made Of and Cat's Paw Comes this weird episode, which I think is meant to be a morality tale, but I have no idea what the moral is. Scotty is ordered medical short leave on Orgalius 2, an earlier version of Ryza, after being badly injured in an explosion caused by a female crewman. So perving at a belly dancers will prevent Scotty from becoming totally resentful towards women. Okay. It was the 60s, but this defies all logic. Then, Scotty is accused of murdering 3 women and is discovered to have been possessed by the spirit of Jack the Ripper, which is conveniently inhabiting the body of Mr. Hengist, the city administrator, who is from Rigel 4. Said spirit takes control of the Enterprise until McCoy tranquilizes the entire crew so the malevolent spirit can't possess anybody else. Then the host's body is beamed out into space, still wishing death on everybody. Nitpicks. Why have we never seen a psycho tricorder, and why do we never see one again? Scotty resents women? No, I think he's very fond of them. I would go as far as to say he dotes on them, but he doesn't seem to think they can be very clever. Lieutenant Karen Tracy. I would have liked to have seen her face for longer than 2 seconds. Spock. In quotes, women are more easily and more deeply terrified, generating more sheer horror than the male of the species. End quotes. That's a hell of a generalization to make about a large portion of the human race, let alone females on other planets. Scott, quote, "Now that's what I call a real captain, always thinking of his men." End quotes. Because we all know that women are ornamental for the majority of this show. I've never thought much of this episode, partly because it treats women as objects to be admired or murder victims. Methinks Mr. Hengist doth protest too much. The blissed out crew all laughing after a series of horrendous killings always leaves a sour taste in my mouth. I can only give this episode a 4. I hope this comment doesn't come across as too woke. Absolutely it does not. I think most people use the woke as an insult is just a bunch of nonsense, me personally. But anyway, regardless, yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, and if anything, I think you're being too generous to this episode by giving it a 4. Yeah, and it's interesting about Mr. Hengist doth protest too much. Yeah, he's constantly, towards the end, I think that's when they're making you sort of trying to make you more aware that he could be the thing, because he does start to protest a lot. But like I said before, his arguments are actually valid and make more sense than what Kirk and Spock are saying. But anyway, yeah, no, this the one thing I would disagree with you about, though, is the Bliss Out crew laughing after Sarah horrendous killings always leaves a sour taste in my mouth. Actually, that's the one funny part of this episode. Oh, God. And no, but yes, I do see why you say that, though, because it's just the overall way that they sort of treat, as Brandon says, women as ornamental or just, you know, murder victims is very distasteful, I think, and it does leave a bad taste in my mouth, and for many other reasons I really don't like this episode. So my rating for Wolf in the Fold out of 10 is a 2, extremely poor. The only thing that saves this episode from a 1 is the funny scene when they're all drunk. I actually did like that and appreciate that, and I get a kick out of seeing that. But other than that, there is nothing good about this episode. It is cliche to the max. A silly murder mystery, a silly falsely accused episode, and it just goes off the rails with this Jack the Ripper subplot of an alien acting cartoonish and turning into a cartoon villain. Just really, the ending of the episode just feels like a dumb cartoon for me. And except for the drunkenness. But anyway, so yeah, this is definitely, I think this would be definitely the bottom tier of original series episodes. I believe I might have had it in my top 20 worst episodes last time I did one, and it absolutely deserves to be there. So that is it for my review of Wolf in the Fold. Now, as for what is coming up next on Enchantment of Eternity, I am going to talk and delay until I can bring out the schedule. Okay, so coming up, where are we now? Wolf in the Fold. So Monday is going to be Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday all next week I'm all doing Revisited. So unfortunately, it will just be for the Patreon supporters. Monday will be the Changeling Revisited, Wednesday will be the Apple Revisited, and Saturday will be Mirror Mirror Revisited. All videos that will be exclusively for Patreon supporters, where I revisit reviews that I have already made and give some extra thought to revise my thoughts. On my channel, though, for everyone to see, Thursday, of course, will be my review of the second episode of Picard, which is, as of the recording of this video, I've yet to see the first episode. So hopefully it doesn't suck too much, or otherwise that won't be the case. I won't review it. But we'll see. I think I'll give it a shot for a bit longer. It'll really be decent. And then the following week I will return to my main channel with new reviews for The Deadly Years and I, Mud. So be sure to check out my channel for all of that, and also as I do many other videos on many other Star Trek topics and cover many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.